Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Julie Mann, and I show men and women how they can create healthy, happy, sustainable lives. And I'm really delighted because today I'm joined by Mike Lawrence. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Julie. Lovely to see you. Lovely to have you on this program.
You too. So for those of you that don't yet know who Mike Lawrence is, he works as a wellbeing and workplace management consultant. So we will get into talking about that in a minute, but I'd really like to start, Mike, by asking you whether your parents were health conscious. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Well, my childhood, primarily I was born and raised in Sheffield many years ago, and it was a case of, my parents were they were born and raised in Jamaica, and they came over probably in the early 60s. My dad came over first to Sheffield. My mum, she came to sort of London. Then they knew each other in Jamaica. But then they lost where each other was going. He found out that she was in London, and he convinced her that there was a better world up in Sheffield. Don't know why. But they were very conscious of sort of well-being, but it was more from how they were brought up in Jamaica, which is totally different to what it was like in the UK.
Yeah, just a little bit different. I mean, I imagine even though it was probably exciting and your father thought it was going to be a better life, it must have still been a massive culture shock.
It was a huge shock. I think initially it's the weather, because I'd never seen snow before, and it was different types of food, because obviously the food that they bought, and even food which they actually grew in the areas in which they lived in is totally different. So it was getting used to the weather, it was getting used to sort of like the way of life and a different culture.
Absolutely. Did your mum try and cook Jamaican food some of the time, or did she just kind of fit in with what was going on in Sheffield at the time?
All the time. It was all the time. But that's what they knew, because when you're coming over, you don't know anybody until you start working, and then they introduce them to a full English breakfast. Whereas there's no such luxuries in Jamaica. A full English breakfast, it was a case of, normally a lot of the times they'd be doing lots of chores, and it wasn't a case of just jumping on a bus and going to school. Sometimes you'd be doing lots of chores around the house and in the areas in which they lived, and it would be feeding the animals. Feeding the animals, and so there's lots of different things to do, and so usually breakfast was, by what they actually, sort of grew, and also what they sold, because many will have, a garden, it's a lot different from the gardens that we have. Lots of food, lots of breadfruits, lots of, luxury foods within there, which they would sell and the roadside to passers by.
Brilliant. So what did you learn, do you think, in your formative years that actually still serves you today?
What I learned was that I had a difficult upbringing, and so what I learned was probably how to deal with that, because as I have now been an adult for many years, and I see other people from my age generation who also came through those early years. Many have got the same stories, had the same challenges and same problems and some sort of upbringing. So what I learned primarily is that it's something that I had to deal. It's something that I needed to deal with. Otherwise, it would have probably affected my health and well-being, in the formative lives, moving forward.
So, what kind of things did you find really challenging when you were growing up? Can you speak about any of that?
I can, yeah, because like I've just mentioned, is that their upbringing in Jamaica is totally different from how was brought, the children was brought up over here. It was very strict, very sort of, disciplined. I remember actually going to, as the days when you were able to go on holiday for a month, you didn't, in work. And I remember, I think at the age of about 11, myself and my brother, my sister, we went to Jamaica and we stayed there for a month and met, the family over there and went to the areas which they, where she was brought up, the mum and my dad. And the other kids, we also spent some time in school. And it was very strict, incredibly strict. And also that's the way in which, that discipline was also instilled in, our parents, and that's how we were brought up as well. It's very, very sort of strict, very sort of disciplined. And to a degree, it was in some regards, it was quite challenging from a well-being perspective. And so typically, you'd be going to school, you might go to school, play football, and you'd see the other parents who might be suddenly, playing football for the school or the Cubs or Scouts. And it's great that you're able to participate, which is great. But you might find that your parents weren't there. And it's not because they didn't want to be there, it's probably because they weren't aware how important that was at the time. Going to parents' evening and all those sorts of things. And so only as in the adult age, as you talk about it, you talk to others, how important those little touch points were. And so in those early years in adult life, it's easy to kind of blame them. But the thing is, though, it's what I've learned to do, and this is the areas of work that I've had to work on myself, which I'm able then to help other people, is that they did the best that they could do with the resources and what they had at the time. And this is where you then have to then make that distinction and give them that love, because that's all that they knew at that time. So therefore, then it's for me and others to then recognise that rather than blaming them for that. Absolutely. And that's huge.
Yeah, that's a really brilliant point that you brought up. And I remember when I was growing up, I was acting my heart out. I was, playing the leads in all sorts of productions. And even when I became a professional actor, and I worked at the National Theatre, my dad never came to see me in anything, and I made that mean all sorts of stuff. But you know what? He didn't think that was his. He thought that was mum's job. And like you say, he was doing the very best he could with the resources he had. He didn't know any better. So I'm really glad that you brought that point up. So tell us your story, Mike. How did you end up doing what you do now?
The story is that from my time in Sheffield, and I always felt as though that, it's my background. I started off doing, in the steel industry, welding, and in the leisure industry. And I just felt as though that there was more to life than what was around me, because I wasn't really clear. And again, a lot of times when I speak to people who are having some challenges and problems in their life, it usually goes back to those early years, not knowing what you want to do, not having that direction, that purpose, that those dreams and aspirations we had as younger children. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just thought, but also there was a lot of racism in Sheffield. And even though that Sheffield was, and the north was very multicultural and people were very, together, and it was, and also friendly on the surface, but deep down there's lack of opportunities. But when I went to London, because I had lots of relatives down there on my mum's side, it was like, wow, there's lots of black people here. I've never seen so many people. But also, they were in senior roles. I saw them in banks. I saw them, in white-collared jobs, which you didn't tend to see up here. So I thought, I need to accelerate my career, go down to London, and also I was also involved in leisure, the leisure industry in Sheffield, and then via sort of London, I ended up in Redlands, which improved my sort of self-esteem as a red coat and brought me out my shelf and gave me lots of confidence. And the plan at the time was to go back to Sheffield because they had the World Student Games and work in there, but that never happened. Met my ex-wife, had 2 lovely children, and spent most of my adult life in London. But in that time frame, I went to university and did a lot of study around sort of management. I learned about sort of the area in which I seemed to be really good at, so I had a shining for, was around people. And so one of the modules that I learned in management, or I was learning in management, was around the philosophy about people, how the mind ticks, how we work, how we think about things, and all things around the mind. And that just took me further and further down that journey of self-discovery, reading books and going on more courses. And so I ended up over those years learning lots of different sorts of modalities, which brought me back to Sheffield at my clinic about 4 years ago. And then to be able to help people going through their sort of wellbeing challenges. And most of the things that I help people with is reflective on my journey. So I suppose not having gone on my journey and having those lived experiences, and some of them are extremely challenging, and I'm able to share with people, my clients, the successes that I had and what I did and how I overcome them as well.
Brilliant. And in your opinion, why do you think there's a need for someone like you?
Well, somebody like me, because it's the thing, there's a lot of things that we're not taught at school. We're taught, maths. We're not actually taught how to listen, actually, as well. And when you think about it, a lot of, when I was growing up in the early years, the families were quite close knit. Your uncles, your aunts, your cousins were closer together. You used to be, they'd give you advice and support and encouragement, whether it be at school, whether it be at college, relationships, jobs, just in life in general. Now, was it Norman Tebbit or was it Margaret Thatcher in that government? They said that if there's no jobs locally, to get on your bike and go and find one. For me, that split and fragmented that family unit. So those close conversations that you used to have with your aunties, your uncles, and even people coming round to your house in the evening for meals, for meals, or those little chats, or even parties. Did I say parties? They used to have in your house. Those nuggets of information, they're not there anymore. And what's been replaced by is Google, to a degree, and to self-diagnose. So where I come in, I kind of come in to that piece whereby, because clients find me either through the internet or through doing interviews like this, or the various connections that I have, or being at shows and talking about it. And then something that I might say is like, it's a bit like when you talked about yourself, your upbringing and your parents not being there for you. There's something somewhere along the line that people will say, that's me. And then it's gone to Google, and it's then a case of, where do I go to find people that are going to help me? Because we know that at the moment in time, the pandemic and everything that we're going through, waiting lists are quite long to go and see people. Through the NHS and the doctors, sometimes people are waiting up to 18 months to go and see people that can help with CBT or counselling. And the thing is, though, that when you go through the NHS, which is a fantastic service, you get what you're given, which is different from being, independent, whereby if you have the synergy, if we get on, if we rapport, and I believe I can help you, then, and we're a match, then, you know, then hopefully we're able to assist and support you, whatever you need.
Right. I really like the fact that you mentioned listening, and I think this is a great expression where I heard, you know, we've got 2 ears on 1 mouth for a reason. And I think it's so much more important that we listen well. And like you say, it is a skill to develop, isn't it? Because we're not brought up necessarily to do that. So in a nutshell, Mike, what do you actually do in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, I help people with their day-to-day challenges by giving them the coping strategies and mechanisms to achieve the things that they want to do in life.
And what are some of those strategies? Can you elaborate on that?
Those strategies is the main one. What you've just talked about there is listening and being empathetic. Because to be listened to, because a lot of times when we're talking, we're actually not listening. We're running a story in our minds. And what we want to do then is to jump in, because we're frightened that what we have in our mind is going to go. Because how many times have you heard, you know, you're talking to a friend or somebody and said, sorry to cut you. I just need to get this out before I forget, because the frightening is going to go. And there's very few people, because, you know, there's a stats, which I think comes to mind, which, you know, in terms when you're looking at, when you're comparing the amount of time, you know, at school, how much time spent reading, learning to talk and listening is the least.
Yeah.
And to be listened to, and to be listened, sorry, go on.
No, you say to be listened to.
Yeah, just to be listened to is a gift. Yeah. So you're not coming in with your own view of the world, what they should be doing. Because automatically, if somebody comes, say, if you was to come and see me, Julia, and say, you know, I'm struggling with, you know, anxiety, you know, it doesn't really, you know, and you know, because you talked about sort of strategies, you know, and I couldn't pull them off, all the different strategies, whether it be NLP or life coaching or all these other different therapy and all these other different modalities. But all those things are just tools, because you could be brilliant at all those and you've majored in all those. But if you really listen to somebody to understand what's actually going on in their world, and to be non-judgmental as well. And just because it might have helped a friend of yours or somebody that you know, and these strategies and skills, these strategies and tools that I use, work on those, you know, and somebody else. When somebody comes into my clinic and sits in the chair behind me, and they then speak for 45 minutes about their unique problem, because it's unique to them, I'm there thinking, I know I can help them. And they will say to me, you know, or they're saying, can you help me? And I'm, in my mind, I'm 100% confident that I can, and in the majority of cases I do. How I get there, I haven't worked it out yet.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's all about being really curious, isn't it? Really curious about who that person is, rather than coming to it, like you said, with a story. So if someone watching right now is struggling, you talked about maybe people struggling with anxiety. If someone is struggling with their mental health, what advice would you give them, Mike?
The number one advice it would be to seek help. It's to seek help, and just to be honest, whether it be a friend, a colleague, a family member, go and speak to you know, your doctor, and be curious to know that you're wanting that help, but also maybe do some of the research in terms of what type of help you actually want, and what do you want, you know, and where do you want to go? Because, for example, you know, you've got somebody who's, because there's so many different routes and it's not clear. It's just not clear because when people come to me, they say, my word, I'm glad I found you. And it's usually it's usually the bottom of their list, because the routes to go to get the help, and quite rightly so, it is the first place, is your GP. You go to your GP, but the GP, some of the services, and so, for example, some of the areas in which I'm trained in, say, life coaching, NLP, they're not recognised by the NICE guidelines, and so it's not part of the primary care service. And so, so automatically, if there are some challenges, you go to your GP. If you're fortunate to get some maybe counselling or CBT, if you are diagnosed by a GP with, say, depression, anxiety, or some other mental health issue, you might be on a course of, say, tablets, for example, which is great. So where I come in is whereby I'll be supporting those people who's under the guidance of the GP, not replacing them, under the guidance support of the GP, and holding them accountable and taking them down that sort of journey, and then leaving it up to that individual in regards to what where they want to go, where they want to be, because a lot of times I help them find out the root cause of the problem, not deal with the symptom.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that's going to shift it, isn't it? Once you know where it's actually coming from. Of all the things that you've ever done, Mike, what would you say you're most proud of?
That's a difficult one, because there's so many. There are so many, and the most recent and I'm most proud of is usually the last good story, because it gives you that sense of feeling that I'm here, I'm serving, I'm doing what I love, and I found out my purpose in life. And it took me a long time to find out what my purpose was, because a lot of people go through life not knowing what their purpose is and what they're here for. And so, for example, a client came to see me last week, and I'm seeing more men, by the way, which is great. And that's been through lockdown. I'm seeing more men, which is sending men out there, who's suffering with any mental health. Please go and see somebody. And I've been helping him, and he's been coming to see me, this particular gentleman, for about 8-9 months on and off with a number of different things. Then he came to see me. Then he was speaking last week. I was telling him about the challenges that he's having with his son, and he's brought his son into his business, and for some reason he's spiraled. He's withdrawn from the business. He's withdrawn from college, and he's put on some weight, and he's got some, he's put on some weight, and he believes he's got some self-esteem issues as well. And he was close to tears, and this was last week. He was close to tears and said, I just don't know what to do. So what I did initially, I was just listening, and although I was listening because I just needed him to get it out of his system, which he did in about 20 minutes. Probably after 5 minutes, I'd already got a plan. But again, not jumping in, I just wanted to give him that space to talk. So at the end of it, we, because I don't tell people what to do, I never tell them what to do, because again, it's my perception rather than theirs, and it's come from them. So you frame it in a way, it's okay, then we've gone down this route there's another way of doing it. And so what we talked about was that reverse psychology. So okay, then son, we've tried this, I've tried all sorts of things, and at the end of my tether, I just don't know what to do. If you were me, what suggestion would you have? And I got a text on Monday morning. No, he called me. Called me on Monday morning. Says, Mike, I can't thank you so much. I had a really good conversation with my son. We spoke for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And we went through that, and I did that. And his son said, I need help.
Brilliant.
I need help. Yeah.
I love that. And that is such a powerful question, isn't it? If you were me, what would you do? Is that the one?
Yeah.
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 Fantastic. So simple and yet so powerful. And that listening.
Yeah.
One final question, Mike. When you are no longer on this planet, how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered just making a difference. You know, just making that difference, knowing that regardless of your background, regardless where you've come from, is being able to find out your purpose, what you're really good at, and just lock into that, and to go and helping lots of people, and doing it with a smile on your face.
So powerful, that smile, isn't it?
Yeah, and enjoying, you know, and then just to, you know, enjoyed what I did, helped, you know, thousands of people to find their true vocation in life and help them to remove those blocks, and did it with a smile, and that would be great. And I've actually cheated, you know, because on my 50th several years ago, I think I was going through a divorce, and I was at low ebb, and a friend of mine created this book, and it said Mike's 50th birthday year. And what I did that year, I took that book, and it was, all the pages were blank, and I took that book with me all around the world, everywhere that I went, and I asked my friends just to write a few words in there. And at the end of that year, I put it away. And every couple of years, I go up there and have a look at it. And so, isn't it wonderful, and isn't it brilliant that you're able to have that whilst you're here, to see the difference that you can make to people, whilst you can, you know, whilst you're here. Because a lot of times we talk about people, we talk about the things that we like to, the difference that we like to make when you're gone, but isn't it great to know the difference that you're making actually now?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I absolutely love that. So everybody watching, please just check out Mike's links, which will be below, and get in touch with him if anything that he said today resonates with you. So all there is for me to say is, Mike Lawrence, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Julie. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.